In March of 1979, while every farmer in western Nebraska was locking diesel tanks as if they were jewelry boxes, Eleanor Harrow did the one thing that made the whole county decide grief had finally cracked her mind. She sold her best tractor. Not the old one with the cracked seat, not the stubborn one with the bad clutch. The good one, the new one, the tractor her husband had signed for 2 months before the accident. Then she took the money, drove east before sunrise, and came home with 2 Belgian mares, a pair of rangy Missouri mules, and a wagon full of iron fittings no modern farmer could name. By sundown, every man at the grain elevator had heard the story. Poor Nell Harrow had gone backward. Poor Nell Harrow had traded horsepower for horses. Poor Nell Harrow, 27 years old, widowed before she had even learned how to sleep alone, was about to lose 1,280 acres of dryland wheat because she could not understand the century she was living in. Her brother-in-law, Calder, heard it before supper. He arrived with his pickup throwing gravel into the yard, wearing the face of a man who had been waiting for bad news and had finally been rewarded. Nell was standing beside the machine shed, one hand on the neck of the largest Belgian mare. The mare was the color of wheat honey, calm as a church bell before it rings. Calder stared at the animal, then at the empty space where the tractor used to sit. "What did you do?" Nell did not answer right away. She kept her hand on the horse. "I sold what I could not afford to worship," she said. Calder laughed once, sharp, unbelieving. "You sold the only thing that made this place run." Behind him, the land rolled away in long, pale swells toward the sandhills, all grass, wheat stubble, fence lines, and wind. To Calder it was simple. Land was muscle. Machines were muscle. Debt bought machines. Machines paid debt. That was the order of the world. And now Amos Harrow was dead, and his widow was standing in the yard with horses. Amos had been gone 8 months. A broken hydraulic line on a hired combine, one bad step, one terrible afternoon, and the farmhouse had become a place where every room still expected a man who would never walk into it again. Calder had waited barely 6 weeks before he began saying the words that sounded like help, but carried the weight of possession. "You don't need to carry this alone. I can take the North Fields off your hands. Town would be easier on you." The first time, Nell had let him finish. The second time, she had walked away. By March, with fuel prices rising again and news from overseas turning every gallon of diesel into a wager, he stopped pretending. "The bank will not be patient forever," he told her that evening, "and the co-op already knows your account is thin. You think a team of horses changes arithmetic?" "No," Nell said. "I think it changes which arithmetic matters." That was when Calder's face hardened. He looked at the mare, at the wagon of iron gates, at the rolled maps in Nell's hand. You are going to bury Amos's farm under sentiment." Nell turned then, and for the first time since the funeral, Calder saw something in her that was not sorrow. It was not anger either. It was a kind of stillness. "This farm was never yours to rescue," she said. Calder stood there another moment, red rising in his neck. Then he climbed back into his truck. "You will call me," he said through the open window. "Maybe not tonight, maybe not this month, but when the note comes due, you will call me." Then he drove away, certain of the future. Most of the county agreed with him. You have to understand what a farm meant in that country at that time. A tractor was not just equipment. It was proof. It proved you were serious. It proved you were modern. It proved you had enough credit to be trusted with more credit. The diner in Broken Bow, men ranked one another by horsepower, row width, tank capacity, and how many acres they could turn before weather closed in. Progress had a sound. It was diesel under load. So when Nell Harrow led horses into fields that had been cut by rubber tires for 20 years, people did not see strategy. They saw surrender wearing a harness. What they did not see was the light burning in Amos's old office long after midnight. They did not see Nell sitting at his desk with her hair pinned up badly and her eyes red from reading. Amos had not left her much cash. He had left something more difficult to spend and easier to ignore. He had left 12 black field books, 3 canvas map tubes, and a cedar box full of weather cards tied with string. Most people thought Amos had been quiet because he had nothing to say. The truth was, Amos had been listening. For 15 years he had measured the farm as if it were alive. He recorded wind direction before storms. He marked which slopes thawed first in February. He wrote down where snow lingered longest behind the shelter belts. He tested soil temperature in 3-inch, 6-inch, and 12-inch depths. He walked after rain and noted where water stalled, where it vanished. Days later, through seeps no neighbor had bothered to name. In the 4th field book, Nell found the first drawing. Not a pretty drawing, a working drawing. A line from the old spring above the cedar break. A second line following a contour no road used. Small squares marked as gates. 3 shallow holding basins. And a note in Amos's careful hand. Water is already traveling. The mistake is paying fuel to make it climb. Nell read that sentence until it no longer felt like a sentence. It felt like an instruction. Amos had found that the highest spring on the property did not need a pump if its overflow was caught and guided before it disappeared into gravel. He had drawn a system of contour ditches, wooden checks, field gates, and shallow basins that would let gravity carry water across the most vulnerable acres. Not all the acres, not enough to impress a salesman, enough to keep the farm alive in a hard year. Then, in the 9th field book, she found the part that made her sell the tractor. Amos had compared the true cost of machinery work against animal work, not the way men argued at the co-op, but line by line. Fuel, repairs, loan interest, tire wear, soil compaction, wet field delays, fertilizer offset from manure, the cost of a horse's winter feed, the cost of a veterinarian sitting useless when diesel was rationed. His conclusion was not romantic. It was colder than romance. For heavy plowing, a tractor still won. For harvest, machinery still mattered. But for cultivation, hauling, light planting, moving irrigation gates, and working soft ground after rain, the old teams could beat the new machine when fuel became expensive and credit became a noose. Amos had underlined one line twice. The future will punish farms that confuse speed with resilience. That became Nell's scripture. Not because it was beautiful, because it was useful. The next week, she hired an old county ditcher named Lyle Beeman, a man with tobacco in his cheek and a trenching machine older than most of the farmers laughing at her. Lyle looked at Amos's maps for a long time. Then he looked at Nell. "Your husband really walked all this?" "Every inch," she said. Lyle spat into the dust. "Then we better not dig straight." That was the first thing people mocked. The ditch did not run straight. It curved in a lazy, ridiculous line across the west quarter, bending around rises so small they were invisible from the road. It looked like a mistake made by a drunk man with a machine. Calder stopped by on the third day. He did not get out of his truck at first. He watched Lyle's ditcher crawl across the field like an insect. Then he slammed the door and walked toward Nell. "You paid a man to ruin your field?" Nell was kneeling beside a grade stake, checking Amos's number against the bubble in a hand level. "It is not ruined. It is cut in half. It is being taught where to carry water." Calder stared at her as if she had spoken in another language. "Nell, listen to yourself." She stood. Dirt clung to her knees. Her hands were raw from driving stakes. "No," she said. "I listened to everyone else long enough." That sentence traveled faster than the ditch. At church, women looked at her with pity pressed thin over curiosity. At the elevator, Calder told people she was making decisions from grief. At the bank, he used quieter words. Unstable, overwhelmed, not practical. He never had to say he wanted the land. Men heard what he meant. The first season nearly proved him right. A horse does not become a tractor because a widow needs it to. Nell had grown up around livestock, but not like this. Draft work had its own language, and at first she spoke it badly. She turned too late. She held the lines too tight. She let one mule crowd the other. The mares learned her fear before they learned her command. She came home with blistered palms and a shirt dark with sweat, furious at Amos for being dead, and furious at herself for needing him. But the animals were patient in a way engines were not. A tractor waited to be forced. A horse waited to be understood. By June, the rows were straighter. By July, Nell could back a wagon into the machine shed without touching the door frame. By August, she could hear a change in hoof rhythm and know when a trace chain had fouled before she looked down. The ditches grew too. Not fast, never fast. A quarter-mile here, a gate box there. A shallow basin scooped out where Amos had marked blue pencil on paper years before. The first time water came through the west channel, Nell walked beside it for nearly an hour, narrow shining thread sliding through fresh dirt. But it moved without noise, without smoke, without debt. That winter, the second fuel shock tightened around the county. There were arguments at the co-op over delivery schedules. Men drove to town with extra barrels in the bed and came home with half of what they needed. Diesel was not impossible to get, but it was costly enough to change the tone of every conversation. Calder expanded anyway. He financed a larger tractor, a deeper well pump, and a center pivot system, he said, would make him untouchable. People admired him for it. That is what false certainty looks like from the outside. It looks like confidence. Nell looked foolish by comparison. She patched harness in the kitchen. She stacked hay. She bartered oats for blacksmith work. She let manure rot down behind the barn and spread it where Amos's notes showed the lightest ground. She spent evenings copying his maps onto oilcloth so rain would not destroy them in the field. And each month, in a ledger nobody else saw, she wrote the numbers. Fuel bought, feed bought, repair cost, interest due, crop sold. By spring of 1980, her fuel expense had fallen to less than a third of what it had been in Amos's final full year. Her yields were not spectacular. That mattered. A miracle would have made the story easy to dismiss. Her wheat came in ordinary. Her oats came in slightly better than ordinary. But ordinary crops with low debt were stronger than impressive crops bought with borrowed panic. The first man to understand that was not Calder. It was Mr. Voss at the bank. He called Nell in after harvest and turned her ledger around with one finger. "You kept more cash than I expected." Nell sat across from him in her plain brown coat, hands folded. "Yes." "You sold less grain than Calder." "Yes." "And still paid more principal." "Yes." Mr. Voss took off his glasses. "How?" Nell thought of Amos's maps, the horses breathing steam in the morning, the water slipping down the contour line like it had been waiting years for permission. "I stopped making every job drink fuel," she said. Mr. Voss looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded once. Outside the bank, Calder was leaning against his truck. He had seen her through the window. What did he want? To talk numbers. Calder smirked. Numbers are patient, until they are not. Nell did not answer. That summer, the sky stopped giving. It began with bright days people called beautiful because they did not yet know they were looking at punishment. Then the wind came hot. Then the rain missed them once. Then so many times the forecast became a cruelty. The wheat curled, pastures paled. Men who had laughed at Nell's horses began standing in their own fields with their hands at their hips, watching leaves fold in on themselves. Pumps ran longer, fuel bills grew teeth, wells dropped. Calder's center pivot made its slow silver circle, until one evening it stopped halfway across a field, its last arc of water darkening the dust beneath it like a bruise. A bearing had failed. The part was available. The money was not. On Nell's place, the spring above the cedar brake thinned, but did not stop. The upper basin sank lower each week, but it still held. Her channels did not flood the fields. They fed them carefully, almost stingily, letting water seep along the roots before the sun could steal it. She worked before dawn and after sundown. The teams moved slow through the heat, and she moved with them. No one called it foolish anymore. They called it strange. Then, as August burned down, they called it lucky. Calder did not call it anything. Not yet. The darkest night came before anyone else saw the proof. A storm rose out of the west without rain at first, only wind and dust. It hit the farm like a thrown wall. Sand hissed against the windows. The barn roof groaned. Somewhere in the blackness, a gate slammed again and again, until Nell could not stand the sound and went out with a lantern. By the time the rain finally came, it came wrong, hard, sudden, too much. The new headgate above the west field tore loose. Water punched through the channel wall and ran wild down the slope, cutting a brown wound through a young stand of feed corn. Nell found it in the lightning. For a moment, she simply stood there, lantern shaking, hair plastered to her face, mud rising around her boots. All the months of work looked small against that rushing water. All the laughter she had ignored returned at once. Calder's voice, the banker's caution, the women at church, the silence of Amos's chair. She went back to the house, soaked through and colder than the rain should have made her. In Amos's office, she sat on the floor because she could not bear to sit in his chair. The field books were stacked beside the desk. One had fallen open. It was the last book, the one with his rougher handwriting from the winter before he died. She saw a paragraph she had marked, but never really needed until that night. A machine teaches a man to hurry because every hour costs money. Land teaches the opposite. Land collects patience the way low ground collects water. The work is not lost because a ditch breaks. The work is lost only when a person decides the break was the truth. Nell read the last sentence twice. Then she stood. She put on Amos's old canvas coat. She went back into the storm with a shovel, a hammer, 2 boards, and the kind of anger that does not shout because it has work to do. She worked until her hands went numb. She drove boards into the cut. She packed mud with her knees. She dragged a feed sack full of stones into the breach. Then another. Then another. Before dawn, the wild flow slowed. By sunrise, the channel held. Nell stood in the gray light, shaking from exhaustion, and watched water return to the line Amos had drawn. That morning did something no praise could have done. It proved to her that she was not preserving her husband's dream. She was now strong enough to continue it. The proof came quietly at first. The Harrow West field stayed green 3 weeks longer than the neighbors expected. The oats near the lower basin filled better. The garden behind the house, watered by a hand gate Amos had once labeled unnecessary but pleasant, fed half the hired crews who came through during threshing. Then the county began to fail in public. A farm auction north of town, then another, then 3 in 1 month. Machinery that had once proved a man's importance sat lined up like defeated animals, hoods open, tires dusty, auction numbers taped to the glass. Calder went to the first auction to look for bargains. By the 4th, he went because he recognized his own future. The day he came to Nell's farm, the air was white with heat. He drove slowly down the lane. That alone told her something had changed. Calder had always arrived fast, as if speed were a form of authority. This time, he parked beside the cottonwood and sat with both hands on the wheel. Nell was mending a belly band in the shade. The Belgian mares stood in a patch of grass still green enough to look impossible. Beyond them, water moved through a narrow wooden gate with a small, steady sound. Calder got out. He looked thinner, not sick, reduced. He walked to the fence and rested one hand on the top rail. For a long while he did not speak. Nell let the silence do its work. Finally, he said, "Voss is calling my note." She pulled the needle through leather. "I am sorry." He nodded, but his eyes were on the field. "I thought I was buying my way ahead of everyone." The water clicked softly against the gate. Calder swallowed. "I was buying a bigger trap." Nell set the harness aside. There had been a time when she wanted this moment. She had imagined Calder humbled. She had imagined him admitting every cruel thing. She had imagined a clean satisfaction. But real defeat did not look like justice. It looked like a man standing in dust, ashamed of the map he had mistaken for the country. He turned to her. What did Amos know? The question was not accusation anymore. It was hunger. Nell could have said, "More than you." She could have said, "You should have listened." She could have said, this farm was never yours. Instead, she rose and walked to the shed. When she came back, she carried the oilcloth copy of the contour map. She unfolded it on the tailgate of Calder's truck and held the corners down against the wind. Amos knew the land was already doing half the work, she said. He knew we were paying machines to ignore it. Calder looked at the curved lines. For once, he did not laugh at them. They are crooked. They are level. He stared harder. The difference landed slowly. A straight line served the road. A level line served the water. Calder touched one blue mark with a dirty finger. And the teams? For the work that needs patience, not for everything. Just for the work machines made too expensive. He looked toward the mares. I called you backward. Yes. I told people you were not fit. Yes. His mouth tightened. I was wrong. Nell folded the map once, then stopped. Not to prolong his shame, to make room for the truth to settle. Finally, Calder said the words that ended the war. Will you show me where to begin? Years later, people in the county would tell the story as if Nell had saved her farm with horses. That was not quite true. The horses helped, the ditches helped, the spring helped, the maps helped. But what saved the farm was a different measure of intelligence. Most farms around her had been built to win good years. Nell rebuilt hers to survive bad ones. That difference changed everything. By 1985, the Harrow place had no operating note. By 1989, the contour system reached nearly every acre that needed it, not as a grand canal, but as a quiet network of shallow lines, gates, basins, and living grassed waterways that held water long enough for soil to remember it. Students from the university came with clipboards. They expected a relic. They found a working system. They found draft teams used where they made sense, and tractors used where they made sense. They found fields with fewer gullies, lower fuel bills, richer topsoil, and a woman who refused to turn any method into a religion. Never fall in love with old, Nell told them. Fall in love with what works when conditions turn against you. Calder did not lose everything. He lost enough. The bank took the newest equipment first. Nell leased his south quarter the next spring under one condition. He would learn the system before he touched the land. He agreed. For a year, he walked behind a team in silence. For 2 years, he carried grade stakes and checked levels. The first time he corrected a ditch line before Nell did, she pretended not to notice his smile. That was her mercy, not forgiveness spoken loudly, a place in the work. The years passed, and the story hardened into legend. The widow who sold her tractor, the woman who made water run sideways. The horse could beat alone. Those names were close, but not exact. Nell did not beat progress. She beat dependence, disguised as progress. She did not reject machinery. She rejected the lie that bigger machinery always meant more freedom. In her old age, she kept Amos's field books in the office, but they no longer felt like relics. They felt like tools waiting their turn. One autumn evening, when the cottonwoods had gone yellow along the creek, Nell walked the west field with her granddaughter, May. May was 13, all elbows and questions, wearing boots too large because she wanted to grow into them faster. Nell stopped at the old contour ditch, now softened with grass until it looked like it had always belonged there. She crumbled soil in her palm and held it out. "Smell that." May wrinkled her nose. "It smells like dirt." "No," Nell said. "Dirt is what blows away. Soil is what stays, because somebody made a promise to it." The girl looked across the field. The land was quiet in the late light. No engine running. No crisis announcing itself. Just a narrow line of green where water had traveled without being forced. Back at the house, Nell took one of Amos's field books from the shelf. Its black cover was worn white at the corners. She placed it in May's hands. "Your grandfather wrote down what everyone else drove past," she said. "Do not copy him because he was old. Read him because he paid attention." May opened the book carefully. On the first page, in Amos's clean hand, was the line Nell had built a life around. "The future will punish farms that confuse speed with resilience." May read it once, then again. Nell watched her face change, just a little, as the sentence found a place to live. That was the real inheritance. Not the acres, not the horses, not even the water. The inheritance was the discipline to ask what the land already knows before paying someone to sell you an answer. So when people say Eleanor Harrow saved a farm by going backward, they miss the point. She did not go backward. She went deeper. And when the loud world ran out of fuel, debt, and certainty, the quiet ground beneath her feet still knew the way forward.